Hello guys, welcome back. Wanted to make a catch-up video with you because apparently Loki decided we're gonna work on Saturday, even though he's the one that said we were going down to one video a day, 5 days a week. I love him as a patron god. I love him so much. Ask me how happy I am. Anyhow, one of the things about worshiping Loki in modern times, and we have to admit this if we're going to seriously worship him as a god, shut up Loki, is that, a lot of the associations we have today, we don't have historical evidence for them. For example, we do not, even though Lokeans, we'd all like to pretend to otherwise, have ironclad historical proof that Loki was worshipped. We have about a handful of things that we can point at and go, we're pretty damn sure this is Loki. Look, it looks just like him. And we don't know. Like, I have this necklace here that is like this changeling thing, and it may or may not be Loki. We don't have any proof that this is Loki, but we don't have any proof it's not Loki either, and that's usually how Lokeans have to look at things. Let me see if I can get this damn thing down. So exciting on this channel. So yeah, this thing. Can you see that? I have no proof that's Loki. We think it's Loki. It could be a shaman. It could just be a fanciful figure, everything our ancestors made. We have a tendency to think, oh, everything they did was sacred and had a meaning. We don't know. It could have just been them goofing off. Like, everything on DeviantArt, for example, is not sacred art. We know that, so we don't know what it is. We say it's Loki. We have a couple other pieces of historical jewelry that we'll say is Loki. We have one bellows guard that we will claim is Loki, but we're not entirely sure. Does some of it match up with the lore? Sure it does, but we're not entirely sure. But it's okay to know that. It's okay to know that yes, this may be historical evidence, but it just as likely could just be something that, because we want historical evidence, because we want to prove he's a god worthy of veneration, we grabbed onto it, and it's okay to know that. It's like the Fire Association is a modern thing. We don't have any ancient temples as of yet that we have unearthed for Loki with huge fire pits in them, like he was the one god they would have, and this is not historically accurate. We have not found an ancient temple made out of stone because he was the fire god and therefore they had to build these huge fire pits. We don't have stuff like that. We don't have any proof that every time our ancestors lit a fire, they did something with Loki. We have folktales, we have regional sayings, we have regional names that may or may not refer to Loki the god, but we don't, as of yet, have any historical evidence, which is fine. People will go, well, what about the lore, the story between, Loki and Loki? We can't absolutely positively point at that and say Loki is therefore a fire deity. We can't absolutely point at it and say that Loki was a fire deity. We're pretty sure that they have fire abilities, but we're not entirely sure. Loki might just be able to eat everything. It would be the least strange thing that happened in the lore. Have you read it? Loki only ate the food. Loki ate the trench as well. We know now that fire doesn't work like that. Whether or not something burns depends on the temperature at which it's combustible. It has nothing to do with what kind of fire it is. It's not like there's a magic fire you put in your fireplace that will stay in the fireplace. If you're not careful, it'll get out of the fireplace and burn your whole damn house down. We know this is a fact. It's why you have guards in front of your fireplace. It's why we have the bellows guard that we think is Loki. I'm spitting on myself. It's lovely. We think it's Loki. We're not entirely sure. Does it match up with the story of the dwarves? Yes, but then that's like, I think I said once, we do have this bellow guard. We think it's Loki. Does it mean that he was a god of blacksmithing? We don't know. There's exactly one reference to the old man being a god of blacksmithing too. Were they both gods of blacksmithing? I have no damn idea. But the story of Loki with the net, therefore I will give him sea associations, and he seems happy enough with it. But we don't have, proof, like we haven't found like a settlement at the edge of an ocean somewhere where they had Loki statues and they had little Loki amulets and they had like tiny little net jewelry or something like that. We have as of yet to find anything like that. We have the net story, which, it's always seemed to me like a later made up story. And I love Loki, believe me. But Loki would be too smart to lay out a net perfectly and then burn it. The story, if you don't know it, is the gods were looking for Loki. And Loki knew that they could use the net to catch him because only something Loki made, I'm not sure how this works, but only something Loki made would catch Loki. Loki therefore set fire to the net, so therefore they can't catch him, right? Well, the gods came and found Loki had perfectly laid out a net, which is not how you would burn a net, so this makes no sense. Perfectly laid it out and burnt it. You would not do that. Loki would not be that dumb, but that's the story, and they looked at the ashes and they figured out how to make a net from the ashes, and there's somehow the net the gods made caught Loki, which doesn't make sense because we also have in the same little bits of lore that it was Thor that caught Loki. That is why the salmon has that thin part in the back, because Loki was hiding as a salmon and Thor grabbed him. The thing is, we have all these different regional stories because all the people weren't united at one time. So in one area, it's going to be a story of Loki got caught in a net. And another one is going to be no, Thor caught Loki. And another one, maybe Loki just wandered back in. I haven't seen that story yet, but we'll probably uncover it somewhere in the lore somewhere. There are people that will therefore debate whether or not Loki ever was bound. They're just like we will debate whether or not Ragnarok is a later Christian invention. One second, guys, these allergies. The truth is, we don't know. So, for example, like the fire thing. A lot of people in modern times have had Loki do things with fire. We've seen other gods do stuff with fire, but we've seen Loki do stuff with fire too, so therefore he picked up the Fire Association. Just like he picked up the Fox Association, there is nowhere in the ancient lore that says Loki had a damn thing to do with foxes. Foxes are known as tricksy creatures, which is why some people give him Fox Associations. But depending on their area, some people give him coyote associations. He seems to respond positively to both. There's nowhere in the ancient lore, and I can't say this enough, that says Loki had a damn thing to do with toys, but my home looks like F.E.O. Schwartz because Loki seems to really enjoy toys, and most modern Lokeans find that it's a good idea to give him lots of pretty things to look at and play with because it tends to keep him from playing with all your important adult stuff most of the time. I've noticed if he wants attention, he will then therefore start in on electronics. But again, we don't have an ancient story because they didn't have ancient electronics of, yeah, if he gets mad, this is what happens. Just yesterday, and I can tell you this story, but it doesn't have anything to do with the lore. I was watching the worst movie ever. I was watching that new Child Play movie. That is horrible. But as I'm watching it, I'm watching the movie, I pause to go cook. The Fox cookie jar had the head turned to look at me. And I said, damn it, Loki. And he goes, what? I said, Loki, that's not funny. Because, we're watching this movie about this killer doll. And the fox's head had turned. I said, that's not funny, god damn it. He goes, what? I said, Loki. He goes, it must have been vibration. And, he had fun with it. Can I prove he did it? No. And it brings up another point. People will say, well, how can you prove you have communication with the gods? You can't. It's faith. Somebody asked me if we hear the gods out loud. No, in general, you're not going to hear the gods out loud. In fact, most people would say if you're starting to hear voices out loud, especially if they're harmful voices, you should get professional help. And that's no shame. If you're hearing voices that are telling you to harm yourself, you definitely should go get professional help. I don't care if it's voices out loud or voices in your head. That's a sign that something's seriously wrong, and there's no shame in needing help. It's some kind of chemical imbalance in the brain. Now, how do the gods speak to us then? The truth is, we don't know. My best guess is they're trying to communicate, and for me, for example, my human brain puts it into words I can understand. But we have to understand that we all see the gods through our own personal filters. I grew up Roman Catholic. I grew up in the 80s. I have all these kind of cultural and personal filters that are going to filter everything that Loki says and does. So it's just like having a camera and having a bunch of filters and putting them, on the lens. Loki might say, "Hey, do this." And because of all my filters, I get something completely different. We do the best we can as humans. We really do. And he has been nudging me though lately because he notices I can tend to get too academic. And then, if you want to get academic with Loki, you'll end up not worshiping Loki because we have no historical proof. But, it is kind of a fine line you have to walk between faith and science because we have science today. Science will tell you nothing is magical. Faith will tell you everything is, and you kind of have to find that happy place in between where you can live and you can experiment. Is everything magical? Try it out and see. Is nothing magical? Try that out and see. Does Loki work with fire with you? With some people he does, with some people he doesn't. Does he like cute toys with you? With some people he does. It keeps my electronics running fairly okay. With some people he doesn't. Most people will agree today it's kind of shared gnosis that he hates getting bored. He hates lack of attention. If you won't play with him in whatever capacity, whether you play video games or you're just doing something interesting or you have enough bright and shinies out, he will make fun. He will make fun. He will invent toys, and they're usually not toys you like. For me, there's a difference between we do have to acknowledge as Lokean. Sometimes things do break. Sometimes they do. But, with me, I know personally there's always this thing of if he doesn't think he's getting enough attention, he goes after lamps. No, do lamps naturally break? Sure they do. But if I lose a bunch of lamps in quick succession, and I have had the electricity in this house tested repeatedly and it's fine, I know Loki's upset. And I will say, Loki, give me that lamp back. You broke it. You can probably fix it too. Never does. So, after a while, I get tired of replacing the lamps, and I don't therefore, have lamps on in that room or something. And then he gets frustrated and he finds a new toy. He'll start to play with the camera, and, cameras do break, but also Loki likes to break electronics. So you kind of have to walk that kind of fine line. And with Loki, I can never tell you if sometimes we accuse him of stuff that he didn't do and he just takes the blame, or we think he took the blame, or we're talking to a Loki we made up in our head. We can all do that. We've discussed about having discernment. Or, sometimes things do break, but, it's one of those things he's picked up of being known to break electronics, being known to destroy things to get attention because he's a trickster. And usually tricksters, world over, are known for being like little kids. And if you don't give a little kid, attention, what will they do? They will throw a fit and they will act out and they will throw things and they will have a fit. If Loki thinks I'm not giving him enough love, attention, and devotion, I will have low-grade poltergeist activity going on. I know it's not a poltergeist. I will be watching a movie just trying to relax and I'll hear like something going on in my garbage can and there's no magical invisible animals in my house, or something will fall in the hall and I'll go out there and nothing has fallen in the hall. And these are things I'm hearing out loud, and it's not my imagination. You'll go and you'll check, and there's never anything there. It's just one of those things I experience with Loki that I don't get with the other gods. But I have no historical proof of that either. There's no historical story whatsoever that goes, once upon a time, Loki was bored, and there was this farmer, and the farmer started. There's nothing like that. We do know he likes to play mischievous tricks, but again, it's not a noted thing in the lore that says, oh, yes, we might have folk tales, somewhere that say, oh, yes, Loki was bored and Loki wanted attention. But, as to the lore, as to the main story groups, we're not going to have anything like that. And, it's kind of important to touch base about that sometimes because a lot of the things Loki has, that he'll end up having with you might be a entirely personal thing. Like I said, the foxes are new. The toys are new. The Fire Association is usually a new thing because we are interpreting the stories that way. We're not sure or not. We do have the Bellows Guard, but that's the best proof we have. And that may or may not be a Loki. That's the problem with archaeology. It's educated guess. Most of what Loki has as towards worship today is entirely modern. There's no ancient stories of Loki getting candy and sweets because candy and sweets were kind of hard to come by back then. They did have sweet stuff. They did have honey. But, it wouldn't be as easy as going to the store and buying Loki a candy bar, or ordering something online and having it, or going to your cupboard and, making sweet cookies. It would have been a little more complicated. So, it's okay to have, modern worship of a deity that doesn't stretch back hundreds or thousands of years. I'd say worship of Loki's got to be at least, under a century old at most. Worship of Loki's got to be a couple decades old at most. It's one of those things, and which is why a lot of people will associate it with comic books and stuff like that. Were there any people that were writing seriously about Loki before the comic books came out? Maybe academics, but Wicca itself is not centuries old, so modern witchcraft is not centuries old. I know people will pretend it goes back centuries unbroken, but it doesn't. So we have very modern religions here. And the best we can do is construct a relationship with a god that makes sense. So while it's fine to, have fire associations, for example, or I have sea associations, or we have toys, or we have foxes or coyotes, or whatever you have going on, it's okay to admit that it's a modern association. I saw one book, and I think I discussed it on the channel, which is why people are getting this mistaken idea. There was one book that tried to paint Loki as the god of the underworld and therefore the god of creation, and it was a huge, huge stretch. We have Hel as the goddess of the underworld. We don't have, oh yes, Hel's the goddess of the underworld, but who was really in charge was Loki. That is nowhere in the lore whatsoever. What people are doing today is kind of playing plug and play, and they're trying to say, well, Loki's children are really Loki. I've seen that, and that's very confusing, because we don't have any historical evidence that people saw the gods that way. People will even fight you to the death in a parking lot over whether or not you should see Hel as a goddess, or you should see Jorgamond or see Fenrir as deities, because they are Loki's offspring, and people will fight you to the death and say that Loki isn't actually a deity. I'm a Lokean. I would obviously disagree, but there are people you have to be aware out there that will say the only deities are the Aesir and the Vanir, and most people will usually settle on the Aesir because they were the conquering race that came in and displaced the Vanir. That is, as far as we know, why there is the story the fight the Vanir had to be older. I think, though I can't prove, that worship of gods in Loki's group, the Jotnar, had to be the oldest group of all, but I can't prove that. I think it has to be. I think it would make sense of why these deities are suddenly painted as these evil deities, just like people had worship of the Titans before they had worship of the Greek gods, but as new deities, hit the damn microphone, as the new deities come in, they displace the older deities, and then suddenly the older deities are either demons, or they're evil gods, or they're evil spirits of some kind out to get people. 1 second. And I think it's important to recap, because I see people getting like way too excited sometimes about stuff. I know Loki's fun and exciting, but we do have to learn discernment. And we tell each other it because there's a difference between sometimes just a candle acting goofy because we have a drafty home or something, and a god or goddess doing something with a candle. We do have to have discernment. There's a difference between practicing candle magic and Loki doing something with a candle. Sometimes it's just because candle was bored goofy. So what we then have to do is go research, what can make a flame do this, what can make a flame do that. And that's where faith comes in. Was it because the candle was poured wrong? Is it because the candle flame is too close to the glass? If it's in a chimney, is that why it cracked? We do have to kind of balance out our faith. And you can just only find out if it was something that God did or it was just a natural thing by experimenting. Experiment with your faith. Sometimes we might think something's a sign from the gods and we act on that, and it comes true later that it seemed like it was a sign. And sometimes it won't be a sign. Sometimes it was just, some random thing that happened. The only thing I can tell you is, I forget who said it, but, if you start looking for coincidence, you will start finding more and more of them. And skeptics will say, well, of course, anything you'll look for, you'll find it. But I've noticed that if you start looking for coincidence, and you guys know I don't believe in it, you'll start finding it everywhere. It'll get kind of spooky. You'll think you've opened something up in the universe. If you start looking for it, you will definitely find it. So, experiment with that too. It's fine to experiment. It's fine to feel Loki has something to do with fire, even if we don't have huge amounts of historical proof. It's fine to think Loki was worshipped historically, even though, again, we don't have, extensive proof. We have, as of yet, as of today, as of 2020, to find this huge temple complex or to find art or anything else. We have a few archaeological examples, may or may not be Loki. That said, the things that we give to the old man may or may not be the old man, the wolf nut included. We just don't know. We don't know, and we don't know, even those of us that worship the old man, we don't know how much of his lore is his lore or how much is lore he absorbed from other gods. That's the problem. All gods have done it. Apollo's a notable example. As Apollo would come into a region, he would just loop up the associations of the god or goddess that was there before him. And to make sense of this, the people would say, well, he defeated this god or goddess in battle. Usually now we know that the story of gods or goddesses fighting is a story of one pantheon replacing another. So there you go. So it's a kind of it's kind of a thing we have to figure out as we go along. I've seen Loki do stuff with fire, and I've seen him totally ignore it too. I've seen him do stuff with water, but it doesn't mean he's like one of the last avatars either. So I'm getting yee back here. So it's okay. You do you. If you work with Loki, you'll just have unexplained stuff happen sometimes, but that happens to everyone. But experiment. You can have faith in something, and you can just dismiss it too. As far as I know, there is no reward at the end of our days if we appear in front of our gods or whatever you think happens that says because you believe this was a sign, you get a special reward, or because you believe this wasn't a sign, you get a special reward. There's really no right or no wrong, but there is what works and what doesn't, and there is heading down danger lane, as I call it. If you're really fascinated with fire and that's the first thing you tell me, I'm like, you might not want to work with Loki, because that sounds like a recipe for burning your house down. Candles are dangerous. I can't emphasize that enough. Fire is dangerous. If you've ever worked in a kitchen, had a kitchen fire, fires are really exciting, super dangerous. Same thing with having a fire in your fireplace. You know that. You could burn your damn house down if you're not careful. Same thing with fireworks. Same thing with having the grill pit outside. You do have to have a healthy respect of fire. And if you're way too fascinated with fire at this point, you love flames and you think they're pretty, I would say wait until you learn that it's perfectly fine to have a nice, safe, contained fire before you start working with Loki. Yeah, you don't want to, if you have pyromaniac tendencies, that he was definitely not a god I would recommend any more than if you have, dark depressive tendencies that, and there's no shame in getting treatment. I'd recommend working with the old man. Sometimes we get gods that they are not the one encouraging us, but it's like they exasperate things. Loki certainly wouldn't be the god of pyromaniacs any more than Odin should be a god that, if you're dark and depressed or you're angry all the time. I definitely would not recommend the old man. It's not that they'll make it worse on purpose, but it's just that our human associations with them will exasperate things. So I hope that helped. And if you guys like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye bye.